there was this post by Brett Devereaux who wrote about the video game Victoria. And he wrote about more generally like how slavery is depicted in video games, which was an interesting way to examine the issue, because when you have video games, historical strategy video games like Civilization and Victoria and Europa Universalis, they try to simulate reality. And it's interesting to see how they tackle the issue of slavery, because if they wanted to do it realistically, they have to find a way to incentivize players to enslave populations, because that's why slavery exists. Like it's cool having people do shit for you. Like, yeah. It's undeniable. It's shitty and wrong, of course. But of course I would say that because I'm not reliant on 100 slaves to sustain my lifestyle. I make the comparison. So there's a way to measure how much energy, how much electricity, how much power a modern human relies upon. And if you calculate, how much work, as in electrical work, how much power a human can generate, and you tally up how much a modern human, how much power they rely on, you can make the analogy that it's about 130 quote unquote energy slaves. Does that make sense?
That to do the amount of work that we get done with electrical appliances and other things, machinery in our normal life, we would have to have about 130 slaves if we didn't have all the tech.
Yeah, think about everything that you do in day-to-day. So you turn on the faucet. Just imagine someone digging a well, and then for the rest of the well's lifetime, they're drawing buckets of water from the well and then like walking it back to the kitchen. And now we have just like the ability to turn on a faucet immediately. Yeah. Or taking a bath. That means drawing up the fucking water again, which involves digging a well, which involves all the tools that you would need to dig a well, all the expertise that you would need to figure out how to dig a well, and then also all the tools that you would need to chop wood, all the wood that you would need to chop, all the wood that you need to carry back to the house, all the time that you spend tending the fire to heat up the water. And instead, it's instant hot water on demand, as much as I want, whenever I want. That's important to keep in mind, just how reliant I am. And I'm just talking about the fucking water. I'm not talking about all the food that I eat, all the clothes that I have, all the like fucking gadgets and screen time. Like me watching a TV show, the functional equivalent would be, I have slaves that are dancing slaves or like bard slaves that are living here that I have to feed, and they are willing to perform on a moment's notice for me. I think that's how it's important to think about it that way, because it makes you realize just how luxuriant we are nowadays.
I spent a few days in a cabin at the beginning of the year that was heated by wood fire, and fortunately there was just a giant stack of wood out back because this was at a sort of resort-ish area, and I didn't have to do any work myself, but I was like, holy shit, in the past, if I wanted to stay warm for every night of heat, I would have to go out and cut down like a third of a tree and chop it up into pieces and haul it in here. And all I do is turn up my thermostat.
Yep. And also, I want to also hone in on the point about tools, because I wrote another post called Considered a Hand Axe. It's nominally about AI, but I talk about how I think for like a million years, the preeminent technology was the stone hand axe, which is this teardrop shaped sort of semi-sharp rock that you can use to cut stuff down. The idea of having a handle on your tool didn't happen until way, way later. And if you wanted a knife or an axe or anything, you had to go to the fucking river, get pebbles, smash them together, and then figure out how to like get some sharpness out of it. If you wanted to cut down a tree, it's not just grabbing a modern day axe with a metal blade that's already sharpened and already hafted. You have to use your hand, your dumb fucking hand, to chop a tree down with a fucking rock. Like it's not as simple as just chopping down a tree. It's like you have to remember all the apparatus, all the logistical apparatus that we are relying on. And all of that just takes blood, sweat, and tears to accomplish. Even when you get to the metal age, I write about this more in detail, but when you get to the metal age with iron, the way iron works, the smelting process, you can use coke, you can use like mined up coal. You had to use charcoal because of the carbonization. So people had to chop down entire forests and make charcoal out of the tree logs, and then that gets you like the temperature necessary to smelt iron, which of course like requires digging out of the ground and then smashing it with hammers. And you see these illustrations of people wearing shin guards in the medieval time from like smashing rocks together. And you have to imagine that so many shins got thoroughly fucked up for them to even start implementing shin guards for mining workers, for that to be a viable concern. So you're talking about just an intense amount of suffering to get very, very basic provisions. And we are unfathomably blessed on that front. And for me, especially if I talk about it from the equivalent of how many slaves it requires, for me to say slavery is wrong, I'm not even judging like the validity or the truth of that. But it's so facile of me to make that claim when I'm doing it from the position of unbelievable privilege.
Mm-hmm. I think it's not inconsistent, though, to say that, like, I enjoy all the stuff that we have, but I wouldn't want it at the cost of 120 slaves, right?
But the question is, would you?
I mean,
is that true?
If I was a Middle Ages slave owner, it's hard to say. I wouldn't be that person. I'd be somebody else. If it was me,
how do you know that?
Because I went to school in America in the 20th century, 20,
right.
21st.
So but you're citing, I guess, like your upbringing.
Right. So my upbringing would have been necessarily different if I was born 500 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And you would potentially support slavery.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying that I am not the same person. Like, so that hypothetical other version of me, of that other random person, definitely probably would have been a fan, right? But if I was given the choice, Steven, you lose all your electricity and stuff, but if you have a bunch of slaves, you can keep some level of the luxury. I'd be pretty. I today would be pretty reluctant, but I do love the framing about that.
If society stayed the way it is, you'd probably be pretty reluctant. But I think if everybody else was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Yeah, it's no big deal if you have 1 or 2 slaves so that you don't have to live in this misery. We'd probably jump on board.
Yeah, unless we were the slaves.
Well,
which since people need more slaves and since
everyone needs 130.
The slave to slave owner ratio would be skewed towards. So
it's not that easy. That doesn't solve the issue because who is the slave depends on like who conquers who, and there's going to be mutual danger from that.
I feel like I'd be not too difficult to conquer.
Maybe.
But, I guess what I was going to say though is we had somebody who I think would never be described as a Luddite, but argued a position that is vaguely in favor of it. If you frame it in the context of like, look, we get 120 people's worth of effort just to like live our lives and do our day to day, light a room, heat and cool it. All, like you said, everything with water and food. It's hard to say like we made a bad move using technology, right?
Yeah,
we actually made a pretty cool move, and I love the illustrative example of cutting down a tree without cutting down with an axe is kind of hard. Cutting it down with your stupid meat hands is next to impossible, right?
Any sort of anti-technology movement is necessarily a pro-slavery movement as well.
I think that might not be definitely they would disagree with the framing, but I think that might